Hello and welcome. I'm Sam Califer, your host for Vision, the show where we talk all about the College of Arts and Sciences as well as its faculty and students. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Gil Carter, an assistant professor in the Department of Communication. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, so excited to have you on and have you here at State. And I'm excited to hear about the work you do. But first, I was hoping you could just introduce yourself and tell me how you got into your area of expertise.
Sure. Well, I'm Gil Carter, and I'm originally from Alabama. I did my bachelor's at the University of North Alabama, and then my master's and PhD at the University of Alabama. Taught there during my master's and doctoral programs, taught a range of communication courses. Then I went to the University of Florida for a year, taught there, and also was director of debate, so ran the debate program there, and came here after that to get a nice tenure track position that's closer to home. So very happy to be here at Mississippi State. In terms of what I study with political communication and rhetoric, the way I kind of look at my journey to that is sort of two parts of my life coming into confluence. So in terms of the political side, my grandfather is a retired state representative, and so I grew up kind of politically adjacent. It was never forced upon me or anything like that, but it was something that I always found interesting. And I was always then the little kid who was getting president's books for Christmas and trying to read all about them and memorize them in order and those kind of things. And so then as I got into high school, that became more and more of an interest. I was elected governor of Alabama Boys State, and then I went to Boys Nation, where we got to meet the president at the White House, and so many great opportunities. I went on to work in campaigns, and so that was the political side for me. And then when I started thinking, well, what should I do as a degree? I always enjoyed communication, rhetoric, and public speaking. I have a lot of background in church, and so I've been preaching and Bible class teaching for a long time, still do that today. Had a speech and debate background, and so I'm like, I think I'll do communication. And so as I was taking some of those early communication classes, I'm like, wait a minute, I can do political communication? So it was like the two big parts of my life kind of coming together, and that's why I'm so excited to get to specialize in that here at State.
Yeah, definitely. It's always interesting to hear about a professor's journey, and it's like you didn't just pick it randomly. You know, it's something that's always been around, and seeing your grandfather maybe at the political rallies or things like that, you know, it's always been an interest for you. And so it's so cool to see you turn it into a career. And so, yeah, we're happy to have you here. And the Department of Communication is a great place. We've got all these different specialties of communication. I know we have like a medical communications and obviously like PR, but so good to have a political communications expert. Yeah, so we're happy to have you here. And so, yeah, I wanted to have you on because, as everyone knows, there's an election coming up. And so, yeah, I just want to hear from someone's point of view who studies this kind of thing, you know, rhetoric and political speeches. And something that everyone pays attention to are these big speeches or the debates that happen. And so from your point of view, you know, and you've thought about this a lot, what role does that rhetoric, the speeches that they give in those debates, what role does that have in influencing voter behavior?
Well, and thank you for the question, because I think sometimes the way it's portrayed gets people to look at those things in a way that's not exactly fair to the event. So what I mean by that is sometimes there'll be like a debate, and then somebody will do like a flash poll to be like, who won, and does this move the needle? You know, those are the kinds of questions. But I think sometimes those aren't the right kinds of questions. When we study things about like rhetoric and political comm, often what we're really trying to look at is how does a speaker define something? So David Zarefsky, who's a big rhetorical scholar, he calls it presidential definition. So how does a president or a candidate or somebody in another office, like a senator or a congressperson, how do they use that position to define an issue? And so I think when we look at the modern state of play today, look at what Donald Trump has done with the immigration issue, right? He his whole political career, from that speech he gave when he came down the escalator to present, has kept that as a forefront issue. Why? Because he defined it. He came out and said, this is what the issue is. Again, whether you agree with it, disagree with it, what has he done? Well, he's made it a subject of discussion that now everybody has to have a position about. Give an example from the liberal side, Bernie Sanders, with making some positions about health care and other positions that were Medicare for all, that were originally more looked at as that's a socialist position. He has now helped incorporate into the mainstream. So it's not even always about let's win an election. Yeah, I mean, that's always what politicians want, right? But sometimes they may win an ideological battle with rhetoric. And I kind of think those are two modern examples from the right and the left of how political rhetoric influences the thoughts of, yes, the media and the candidates, but also the thoughts of everyday citizens of what's important.
That is so interesting. Yeah, there's a lot more going on that stage than just the exact results of that night. And yeah, so which they're in political communication, they have like whole teams that are helping them craft these ideas, and they obviously connect with the American public. And so that's why I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is like regardless if you agree or not, the border issue or Medicaid for all, healthcare for all, those are issues that we talk about now because they have been articulated in a way in politics that resonated with people. And so interesting. And so that's kind of the stuff that you like to study, and you bring that to Mississippi State. And part of that is you're teaching a new gen ed class called Words That Change the World. And so, I would love to hear about that class, what inspired you to develop it, and what do you hope you can accomplish through it?
Sure, and picking up there on the theme of kind of definition, and particularly the way it might pertain to the class, go back a decade, 2 decades ago, and think about those issues that we just mentioned about immigration and about Medicare for all. Who was talking about them then? Not at the same level. Well, somebody with the ability to define and the forum had to introduce that into the political lexicon. Right. And so what we're going to look at in the new course, Words That Change the World, which is coming out in the spring. I'm so excited about it. I've taught a similar course at another institution before, and so when they were looking for some new classes to develop, I said, I think we could work on that similar concept with this. As we're looking at great public addresses kind of throughout history and the way they have affected us. So let's take, for instance, the FDR Pearl Harbor address, A Day Which Will Live in Infamy. That was not the original wording in that speech. It was a day which will live in world history. So you got to remember too, right? Something like that happened. They had basically a 24-hour turnaround. Pearl Harbor was bombed early Sunday morning in Hawaii time. That's about noon Washington time. So he had, not even really 24 hours to react to the crisis, hear about it, figure out what to say. And so you can look at the original drafts, and they had world history, and where FDR took a pen and struck through it.
Incredible.
And wrote infamy. So then again, back to the power of even a single word, what did that do to define what had just happened for everyone? It wasn't simply a notable event. That's what world history means, right? But it was a bad event. It was an event of notoriety. Look also at Gettysburg Address. Lincoln said they gave their last full measure of devotion. That's another term we hear kind of thrown around, right? Again, a phrase we hear more today, but that wasn't talked about then, like last. It was all they could give, but it was full, it was complete. It was a measure, it could be quantitatively taken, last full measure of devotion, kind of putting it in even a religious sense. So even you take a phrase like that and how it's affected the way we look at veterans and battlefields, and anyway, so that's going to be the kind of things we investigate in Words That Change the World.
That is so interesting. Just trying to find the difference in like the connotations in those words, like world history and infamy is such a good example, because we might still talk about that speech, or an event that lives in world history, but an event that lives in infamy. That is just something, it sticks with you, it has that visceral reaction, and it matters. And something that I was thinking about before we had this interview was, the I Have a Dream speech. And that is something that everyone knows, Martin Luther King Jr. speech. And I think that is kind of, he could define the image of what he was fighting for. He wanted everyone to be able to live in peace, so I think that is a good example of how just those small things, the very small decisions that people make, have a big impact in the way their message is received. So cool, and I'm glad that you're bringing that. I want to take the class. So I'm
Come
sure,
anytime.
I'm sure students will get a lot out of that. And so the election's coming up. This is something that people talk about a lot, and so I had to get your point of view from this. If you're having a conversation with someone you might not necessarily agree with, what's the best way to go about that? And when I mean best, I guess I mean like the most productive way from your point of view, thinking about it, from rhetoric and, accomplishing a goal. What would you say about that? Sure.
I think you have to start by looking for areas of agreement, right? Because often people might agree in principle, but not in practical, right? You're not going to find a whole lot of people who are like, nah, we're not for this potentially thing. So, okay, let's start there. Then how do we achieve that? And I really think that's where a lot of the breakdown is a lot of times, is the bridge from principle to practical. Because oftentimes you won't get people really disagreeing on the idea, but on how that idea is carried out. Same kind of thing if you think about it from the standpoint of they might disagree on the impacts, but they agree on the evidence.
Right.
So everybody pretty much sometimes can observe what is happening,
Right.
but it's what do we do about it? So I think even looking at, not even just searching for areas of agreement, yes, but seeing, is that area of agreement strictly in the idea? Is it strictly in the evidence? And then we're disagreeing on the impacts and we're disagreeing on the practical? Or maybe do we actually have some agreements in the practical world? And how might those be implemented?
Right. Yeah, I think you have to check within yourself what you're trying to get out of that conversation. And so you have to be willing to, work with them or, not jump down their throat and hope that they're going to treat you the same way. But yeah, coming at it from a point of view, it's like, let's figure out, what are we talking about? And if it's something, I think everyone agrees, like, people should be happy, people should be safe, but how do we get from where we are now to there is what people disagree with a lot of time. But yeah, the overall point, like, it's don't get lost in the details and see if we can agree on the bigger issue and how do we move forward together. I think that's something that is missing a lot of times. People want to show that they're right more so than get to a solution. Okay, we've got a couple more minutes. I want to ask you, there's people are being barraged with all these political messages. What advice would you give them? How do we make informed decisions?
Well, no, that's a great question. It's something that we looked at in my political communication class yesterday as I was showing them examples of mail. That's another thing that I study, political mail. Look at who's sending that stuff to you. So for instance, there was a stack of mail from the National Association of Realtors.
Oh.
Okay, that had to do with U.S. Senate elections. So why is the National Association of Realtors trying to influence a U.S. Senate election? I'm not even saying I know that answer, right? But I know the question.
Right.
And I think that's, in terms of a citizen, if you're looking for, like, why is all this information coming to me? Are you getting it from a PAC and you don't even know who the name of that PAC is? Or you know the name of the PAC, but you don't know the names of the people funding the PAC, so you really don't know who this is and what's going on. I think that's a way for you to think about, like, calm in terms of if you're the message receiver, right? Who is the sender?
Right.
And I think that's a very basic question that we sometimes don't even ask when we see political messages, but I think it's a very important one.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on Vision TV. And thank you all for joining me, or thank you all for watching this episode of Vision TV. We'll see you next time.